It's a great pleasure this afternoon to be sitting down with Gilad Atzmon, a man I've followed for a long time on YouTube and his writings on Middle East and politics and Jewish identity and areas of insight that he brings to this has always impressed me. I've been visiting Israel since '98, and I've been reading and studying widely about the history and culture. And I've found that one of the clearest voices and the most gallant voices looking at the issues that this throws up has been Gilad Atzmon.
Thank you so much.
Just to kick things off and to bring in a little Scottish link, because I'm sitting here in Perth, I would just start by saying what drew me to the writing and speaking of Gilad, and it's this. In Scotland we have a saying, "We're all Jock Tamson's bairns," which comes from the dark myths of history. No one quite knows why that saying exists, but what it means is we all share a common humanity. We all are essentially the same under the skin. And I think the thing that impressed me most when I started to look at the things, Gilad, that you had been writing, is that you have come from a society which is deeply divided and deeply prejudiced in a very fundamental way against the other, against the foreigner, against the person who is, goyim, who is not of the tribe.
Just one correction. I think that it is very united against the other. It is divided on different internal issues, but when it comes to the other, they are pretty united, and this is exactly the essence of the tribal identity.
Yes, and the thing that drew me to your work was that you broke out of that. You looked at the other and thought that other over there, that's a man too, or that's a woman too, and we share a common humanity. And the way I saw it was that was one of the starting points for the work you've done here. Is that right? Is that how you see it?
It is very, very interesting, and I'm gonna tell you something that may surprise you, and and probably will disappoint many of your listeners and my followers as well. People don't understand that Zionism, early Zionism, the founders of this movement were at large uniquely anti-Jewish. They were repulsed by the Jewish diaspora identity, by the fact that Jewish are non-productive people, that they are usually associated with oligarchy, that with banking and cosmopolitan identities, and so on and so on and so on. And there is a room to accept that the founders of Zionism read the picture correctly. However, so the diagnosis was correct. However, the remedy was slightly unique and revolutionary, as many Jews happen to be. They said it's not really our fault. It all happens because we don't live on our own land. I say, I realize that it's a camera, so it's, they basically invented themselves as a nation, as Shlomo Zand likes to see it. And there is a lot of truth in what he says in that regard. They invented themselves as a nation, and they basically believed that once they come back to Palestine, they will manage to transform themselves into people like all other people. Now, part, I'm from a mixed family. I have one side of my family has kind of long roots in Palestine. I mean, longer roots in Palestine. They came initially in the 19th century. The other part were extremely Zionists. Came in the 30s from East Europe, and my kind of, I wouldn't like to say Zionist, but the Israeli patriotic upbringing that I was subject to made me a great believer that Jews can be transformed into something very ethical. So in a way, what led towards my anti-Jewish awakening maybe as its roots in early Zionism. I wanted to believe that we could be, as a youngster, that we could be an ethical bunch of people, that we could be people like all other people. But at a certain stage, I realized that other people don't want to be like other people. The French don't want to be like other people, they want to be French. You Scots, you want to be Scots, at least half of you say, we want to be Scots, we don't want to be
Well, the other half do
Scots.
too. It's complicated.
I don't want to go into Scottish politics, but I'm actually think that we can later talk about Scottish politics because it is very revealing and it is very interesting for me. Other people don't want to be like other people; they want to be themselves. And when the Jews realized that what the most is to be themselves, Zionism was very quick to deteriorate into a tribal ideology. The Jewish goy hatred, the hatred towards the other, and if you are a Jew, the other is basically the rest of humanity, which is humanity. So this hatred towards humanity established itself. The Palestinians became goyim. Goyim is Gentile. Goyim de jour, and suffered enormously, and still suffer. And the problem with Zionism, from an early Zionist perspective, is that rather than changing the Jew into a civilized human being, which was the initial this initial Zionist belief, what happened is the opposite. Zionism was Judified, and it is hardly surprising because it was a movement that was meant to serve the Jewish people. The Jewish people made Zionism into a very Jewish movement. It is hardly a surprise. But what I explain now, maybe it's slightly complicated, help us to understand why the most interesting voice who help us to understand Jewish political morbidity, Jewish goy hatred, they are all people who were product of this Zionist, early Zionist upbringing. I'm talking about Israel Shachak, that help us to understand the Talmud. I can talk about Gideon Levy, who writes for Haaretz and is doing a great job. He is still talking in those ethical terms. Uri Avneri, is still regards himself as a Zionist in the sense of that early belief that the Jews can become civilized. The difference between those nice people and myself is that I'm not so sure at all that there is a prospect of a humanitarian, empathic future to people who subscribe politically to any form of Jewish identity.
So that answer concentrated very much on the Jews and on the Jewish identity, and not, as I maybe thought it might do, on the treatment of the other. And was it more of a reaction against the culture you were brought up in, initially, rather than a reaching out to the other culture?
The thing is, and I delve into this topic extensively in the Wandering Who. When it comes to Scots, You are a Scot. You
Awfully.
basically, sorry.
Awfully.
You probably know who you are. If I ask you, what are you, you'll tell me I'm a Scot, and a Frenchman will tell you I'm a Frenchman, or I'm a Catalan, or I'm Spanish, and so on and so on. When it comes to the Jewish secular people, people who are identified as Jews, but they don't identify with Judaism. They don't necessarily identify with Jewishness. When you ask them, what are you? They will start to tell you, see, we are not Christian. I thought, are you Jews? Yes, but yeah, but we don't believe in Judaism. So are you cosmopolitan? And they cannot really define who they are, because modern Jewish identity, which is the secular Jewish identity, the reduction of Jewishness into racially oriented or ethnicity or whatever you want to call it, this type of identity is driven by negation. I'm not A, I'm not B, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a cosmopolitan, I'm not a Brit. And there is nothing wrong about defining yourself by negation, but it is not the most peaceful identity. Now, where you see
Yeah,
it,
I mean, from a Scottish perspective, I mean, Scottish identity is complex, and it's got perhaps more complex in the last couple of years.
sure.
The most toxic part of it is the negation part of it. We're not English, right? The
By the
most
way, it may be, I don't, I'm not sure that we want to get um, into a kind of a political Scottish political affairs, but it can be very toxic, and it can be very positive. The
it
question,
can be very positive. Yeah.
exactly. The question is what you do with it.
Yes.
If you want
But
to
the
celebrate,
point is the point I'm making is that an identity based on positive attributes and a realistic and full understanding of where you come from and what your people stand for and what your people have done, it can be a positive thing, and it's important to a human being.
yeah,
An identity based on what you're not can be much more destructive.
I agree. And this is exactly the issue. Now, when you meet quite a lot of those, for instance, Jewish secular anti-Zionists, and they start to talk to you in the name of Jewish values, and you ask them, what are those Jewish values that you are talking about? The Jewish values that we learn from the Torah, but you tell them, but you said that you're not religious. And by the way, there are no humanist values in the Torah. And if you find them or in the Talmud, it is a big question, because the whole idea of Judaism is that it is tribal. It is tribal as opposed to universal. It is there to define the interest of the tribe. Now, there is nothing wrong about being tribal. The problem with tribalism starts when we are celebrating our symptoms on the expense of other people. This is exactly the problem with Zionism. This is exactly the problem with Israel. They celebrate their symptoms on the expense of the Palestinians. By the way, I, in the Wandering Who, went out of my way to argue that these symptoms are unique to secular Jews, to Bolshevik Jews, who celebrate the symptoms on the expense of the Ukrainian. This is what we call the Holodomor. The great Jewish historian Yuri Sleskin writes in the Jewish Century, which is a very important book, writes that Jews were Stalin's willing executioners. And we know how many people Stalin killed. Um, and we can take it farther, and obviously we can talk about the Palestinians, and we can also talk about the crimes that are committed by Jewish oligarchy, whether it is Goldman Sachs or other bankers around the world.
This is maybe one of the reasons I'm quite interested in all of this, because I am Scottish, and there are similarities. Right, I would say to you that when it comes to international banking conspiracies, we take second place to nobody. I mean, it was a Scottish crook that set up the Bank of England. It was Scottish drug dealers that set up the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. It was a Scot called John Law who bankrupted France. So we're up there in the international banking conspiracy terms. And
by the way, there are also a lot of similarities. There are also a lot of similarities between British aristocracy and Jewish elite. We can find, and if you go to the East, you can find some similarities between Chinese migrant communities in the East. Jews are not the only people who perform this kind of Jewish oligarchy. I mean, is not the only group of people that perform this kind of behavior. This is clear, but there is one crucial difference. Jews are probably far better than anyone else in doing it, and this is very easy to explain. Jewish religion is very unique for being an exilic religion, exilic from exile. Judaism, as we know it, Yahadut in Hebrew, was born in Babylon. The conditions in Babylon were very similar to Europe 19th century. A vast assimilation of Jews. Jews are becoming more and more prosperous, and many of them are drifting away from Judaism. It is there in Babylon where some Jews say, if we don't do something very quick, there won't be Jews anymore. And this is where they form Judaism as a uniquely exilic religion. You live in Babylon, but you belong to another place, to a promised land. You say, next year in Jerusalem. You don't feel that Babylon is your right place, but you are there. And you start to develop all those methods of segregation, like kosher food and minyan. For instance, when a Jew comes to a new city, he cannot just pray to God. He has to find at least 9 more Jews in order to pray. Once he finds these 9 Jews, he probably goes after that for dinner, and they start to talk about business. So it's a religion that developed a few very interesting exilic survival methods, and it is probably true that you Scottish are doing it for 200-300 years. It is probably true that Muslims migrant to the West are doing it now for 70 or 80 years, but Jews are doing it for 3,000 years. And they have been developing unique survival strategies that make them very good at it.
Let me give you a couple of things where there's differences between Scotland and Israel and the Jews, and some similarities as well.
There are a lot of differences.
The things that I see similarities as well.
Yeah.
You're quite right that the Scots have a history of travel, right? The word comes from Sukkot. It means temporary dwelling. Same as tent, right? It means to wander. The Scots are wanderers. And if you look at the Declaration of Arbroath, it lists where the wandering came from, where they came from along the Mediterranean, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Scotland, Dalriada. But as they moved, their cultural identity, the place they were in, was always the place they were in. There was never this looking to somewhere else, and they were displaced as a nation and not scattered maybe the same way. So that's a different experience. But there's something that I do see, and it's smaller in Scotland, much smaller, I see it in Scotland and I don't like it, and I see it in Israel and in Jewish culture, and I see it in America, and that's exceptionalism. There is a Scottish exceptionalism. You might not see it because you're dealing with maybe a larger
I
exception.
definitely see it.
But there's a Scottish exceptionalism as well. It comes into politics because a lot of the how will that ever work questions that come out in politics, they answer in Scotland as well because we're Scots, because we are special, right? And that's a dangerous thing to believe of yourself.
And by the way, the other day I had a debate on my on social media in reference to one of my papers about Jewish cognitive elite, and one of my friends pointed at the Scots and suggested that this is a very similarly a very unique tribe when it comes to cognitive abilities. We are living in Britain. The most interesting philosophers came from Scotland. Most interesting economists came from Scotland. You are relatively a small people. You are very brave. The soldiers who are going around the world and fighting the British Empire war are in many cases Scots, or Scots are overrepresented. We know all of it, but there is one big difference. If I come to live near to you tomorrow,
you would fit in well. You'd be Scottish in no time.
I never felt in Scotland, and I did a lot of work in Scotland, never felt kind of rejected due to my ethnicity or anything else. And Jewish exclusivism or exceptionalism is way more radical than the Scottish Scottish exceptionalism. For instance, we don't. I cannot think of Scottish lobbies operating globally or mounting pressure on the American administration ahead of the Scottish breaking out of Britain polls. Yeah, you don't. You if you want to be like the Jews, I think that you can, but it will take you another 3,000 years of practice. I can help, because I know now the strategies. I write a lot about them, and I think that I can make anyone into a Jew. Just give me 3,000 years. And another thing, I guess that you don't see a lot of black people, for instance, in Scotland, and not as many as you see in London, let's say.
No, definitely not. It's still it's still predominantly white.
Yeah, and yet, if there is a black person who lives in Glasgow for 3 generations, he would probably see himself as a Scot. Am I right?
Yes. And specifically Glasgow, he sees himself as a Glaswegian first and a Scot. Yes.
Yeah. And you Scots wouldn't have a problem with it.
No.
Yeah, try to think whether the Palestinians who live in Palestine on their land, but actually they are under Israeli, subject to Israeli regime or controlled territories. They don't feel Israelis. The Israelis don't want them to feel Israelis, and so on and so on. And why? Because the racial the racial attitude is embedded within the Jewish identity, political perception of the world. Some religious Orthodox would tell you that this is it has nothing to do with Judaism, and I'm not a Judaic expert to verify whether they are right or wrong, but I think that they're not telling the entire truth. As we all know, it is not very easy to become a rabbinical Jew. It will
No,
take you quite a few years.
I have a Canadian friend that's currently going through the process.
Yeah.
It's just about through the process, and it's been extremely expensive, not just in cash terms, but
Some people say that,
specifically in
yeah.
cash terms.
Some people say that Judaism is not a religion. It is a profession. You know, it is definitely, you know, if you want to join a synagogue, it will cost you quite a lot of money,
Just before we
as we
just
all
before
know.
we leave the exceptionalism area, right? You know, in Scotland, it's relatively benign, but it has its downside. You know, it goes from you know, if you have a drink, you might say, "Here's taste was like a sky food or a deed," right? Which is, if you didn't quite catch that, is, you know, who's like us? Nobody left alive, right?
Yeah.
Here's taste was like a sky food or a deed. It does say that we're special, but it's usually self-mocking. There's a bit of self-mockery in there as well. It takes the edge off it, and for the most part, it's relatively benign. I don't think it is in Jewish terms, and also in American terms. If you look at what America does by way of policy, and what American people will accept from the government uncritically, because we can't be wrong because we're American. You start getting on the political scale, it becomes very, very toxic because people are no longer critical. The thing that I got a lot of trouble, I got called a lot of bad names because I stuck up for you one time on Twitter, because you were being called an anti-Semite and this and that. And I said, no, that's not right. He's not an anti-Semite. And actually, what you need in any culture is you need people who are critical. You need people who will point out the flaws. And in response to that, I got called an anti-Semite by some very highly qualified people.
By the way, by the way, as you probably know, you cannot be anti-Jewish racist in Britain. If you would say anything that is could be considered as a racial slur, racial swear or slur or whatever, you will have the Metropolitan Police, you know, in your door.
The point I'd like you to address is this: is if you take this exceptionalism and then you take that and you apply it on a national level, and Israel, the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, is a national expression of Judaism that was different from everything that went before for the last 2,000 years. If you apply that on a national level, the lack of self-critical examination can be dangerous. I see it in America. There's not enough self-critical examination about what the record is. You see it in Britain too. But
by the way,
particularly bad in Israel.
By the way, no, it's the other way around. It is the other way around, actually. I hardly get any trouble from Israel. Israelis don't try to stop me saying what I'm saying. Some of them are uniquely upset, and the Israeli embassies in different places in the world will try to stop my concerts, and they probably manage to succeed in few places. But the criticism of Jewish identity, of Jewish religion, of Jewish racism, of Jewish barbarism in Israel in Haaretz, through books that are published in Israel, and so on and so on, is definitely way more courageous than our Guardian or the BBC. Now,
Oh yes, Haaretz is far harder hitting than any
for sure, for
newspaper.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the reason is now, but you said something about America. I actually, when I look at America, and I can see a lot of very successful outlets that explore different forms of dissent of American politics. In Britain, we have a problem. Where is our British counterpunch? Where is our British Information Clearinghouse? Where is our British Veterans Today? All those magazines are magazines that I write, write for occasionally. In some of them, I'm even an editorial. We don't have anything as such today. Now, this brings us into probably the most interesting topic: dissent. Dissent is crucial. One of the most interesting aspects of Jewish identity politics is the unique ability to dominate the dissent. So, for instance, when it comes to Israel, the dissent movement of Israeli barbarism, the so-called anti-Zionist or pro-Palestinian or Palestinian solidarity movement, is vastly dominated by Jewish activists. The outcome is that the movement that is dealing with Jewish oppression in Palestine is more sensitive to issues to do with the oppressed, with the oppressor. Sorry, with the oppressor. With the oppressor rather than with the oppressed. Rather than talking about Palestine, most of the time we talk about how to prevent anti-Semitism within the Palestinian solidarity movement. And in order to do that, we use few Jewish oligarchs that send money to different Jewish organizations, to different Palestinian organizations. And the outcome is that we end up with a few Palestinians, what the Jews call sabos goim. Palestinians who are kosherizing this entire operation. One of them is, for instance, Ali Abu Nima. Ali Abu Nima, along his career, he chased at the time Israel Shamir, who was a very interesting intellectual voice. He then chased Paul Eisen. He then chased myself. He then chased Alison Weir, who is a crucial voice. And all those names, including yours truly, are people who identified some different problems with Jewish identity that are crucial to discuss. And the Jews within the movement, how they call them, were very upset by it. Now,
is one aspect of this the move to only look at political settlement post 1967. The expulsion of people from the legitimately and legally held land.
Yeah.
Before 1967 is not questioned.
For sure, and this is exactly the Zionist. Theoretically speaking, there is no difference between the BDS goal statement as it stands now and the Likud party. I'm not saying that it's the same party, but the BDS movement changed the goal statement to fit with the Israeli consensus that we have to deal with something that happened after 67. Now, the issue, maybe I should have started with it, because this is the primary assumption or preliminary introduction to my thought. Israel defined itself as the Jewish state. Nobody denies it.
Jewish and democratic.
fine. There is a contradiction in terms between Jewish and democratic, but it definitely defines itself as a Jewish state. We say we are the Jewish state. This is what they say about themselves. If Israel is the Jewish state, the most crucial questions that we have to ask ourselves are: one, who are the Jews? What is Judaism? What is Jewishness? How those three terms refer to Judaism, to Zionism. We have to concentrate on the J word to understand the essence of the J word. Now, the Jews within the movement that actually operate as control opposition do whatever they can to push us away, to divert the attention from this most crucial question. And this is where I decided to intervene. This is why some people call me anti-Semite, or they claim that I'm anti-Semitic, because I really want. I don't talk about race. I've never mentioned the word race. I don't think the Jews are race. I don't think the Jews are Semite. I think the Jews are slightly jealous of the Palestinians because they are the real Semite people in the region. I say, if you want to call yourself the Jewish state, I want to ask what that state means really and what this identity means. But I take it further. If you want to call yourself Jews against Zionism, or Jews for Palestine, or Jews for Jews voice for peace, or whatever, I want to ask exactly the same question. What is your Jewishness? What is it in your Jewishness that call for peace? And this is obviously very, very offensive for the so-called Jewish anti-Semite, because they cannot offer an answer. When Jews cannot offer an answer, they will try to kill you. This is exactly what they did to Christ. This is exactly what they did to Spinoza. This is what they did to Uriel da Costa. And this is what they try to do to me. They try to kill my career, to discredit me. And surprisingly enough, it was counter-effective.
Yes. And as I said, that I went on to Twitter at one point to state that you were not an anti-Semite, and I thought that your criticism of Jewish culture was necessary. I was amazed at the high caliber of people who were then calling me names, and not just the volume, but I mean people who were editors of major newspapers and things would come on, call me names, and then block me. It was quite interesting. So I thought, well, what do I do with this knowledge? I thought, well, I better buy your book, The Wandering Who. So I bought your book. I enjoyed your book. It was very good. It was very crisp. It was very insightful. It was very readable. Now, there were a couple of real surprises in there for me. One, in particular, I want to give you a little bit of background to. Right, I've travelled in Israel. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Jewish part of Israel with religious Jewish families, religious Zionist, but specifically religious Jewish families. Mm-hmm. And speaking to rabbis and quite well-educated people on the subject of the Bible. Now, I'm coming from a Christian perspective, and you might think that would be a short conversation, but it's not proven to be that. Now, from a Christian perspective, there's a problem with Judaism. You've only got half the book. You've only got part one. So the Christian understanding is often different, and the Christian understanding often looks at the Jewish understanding, thinks, well, you actually don't understand anything. You've missed the point here. But one aspect that we got involved in quite detailed discussions was about prophecy and about what is going to happen, what the Bible says is going to happen in Israel, Palestine, Jerusalem, to the Jews, to the rest of Israel, to all these people, right? So we have this discussion with a very learned rabbi, and the question is this: what's clear from the Christian Bible is the prophecy concerning the Jews is that there will be eventually a super state based in Europe. There'll be a leader who will go to the Jews and he will say to the Jews, I will make you a deal. I will build you a temple. We'll get rid of that dome of the rock. Build you a temple. I'll make you number one in the Middle East. We'll knock the living daylights out of the Arabs. You will be top dog. And the Jews will buy the deal. And the deal's a 7-year deal. 3.5 years into the 7-year deal, the deal's reneged on. And the Jews come in for the worst persecution ever from this political leader. But that's a biblical understanding. There's enough in the Old Testament, there's enough in the book of Daniel that was not a surprise to my rabbi friend. He understood that basic narrative. So the question to him is this: if you understand that this man's going to come from Europe, he's going to offer you a 7-year deal. 3.5 years in, you're going to get it in the neck. You're going to be cheesed. It's like getting creamed, but it goes on for longer. You're going to be persecuted like never before. Why take the deal? Why take the deal? You know from the outset it's a con. Why take the deal? Now his answer was really surprising. Really surprising. What he says is, oh no, the Jews would take that deal. The Jews would take that deal. Why? Well, that's 3.5 years in. We're top now. 3.5 years, who knows what's going to happen in 3.5 years? We're top now, would take the deal. And that was his view of the Jewish mindset. Now, the only other person that I've ever seen, heard, read, that pointed this out is you. Because what you pointed out is there's an enormous short-termism in Jewish culture. It's advantage today. It's not strategic thinking for 3.5 years down the line, or even 3.5 months sometimes down the line. It's what's advantage today. So I'd like you to speak a little bit about that and where you think it might come from.
It is a very, very, very interesting topic, and as you know, I dedicated third of the Wandering Oud to the issue of temporality, asking what is it to understand time. And I argue that short seeing is embedded within Jewish existential perspectives, and it is very interesting to understand why it happened. You know, one of the reasons to look at it or to understand it is that within Jewish culture we do not have a notion of history. Along their history, since Josephus Flavius, which is Roman time, the Jews didn't write their history. Why do we write history? Why do we look into the past, normal, ordinary people, Brits, French, Indian, Chinese? Why do we look into the past as we move along? We look into the past as we move along because our understanding of the present is changing, and our understanding of the past is changing accordingly. And as such, our understanding of the future is also changing. So if we understand that something actually went wrong in the past, and it helps us to understand what Putin or Obama are doing today, history becomes ethics. It saves us from repeating our mistakes, for instance. It saves us from throwing bomb on Iran, as much as the Jewish lobby wanted us to do it. Jews didn't have history. What they have instead is the Bible and the Talmud, and especially the Talmud. You don't have to look back. The Talmud tells you what to do. This is why, and this is it's a very interesting topic. As soon as Jews decided to be people like other people, this is when they invented their history. and they invented their history to fit into their vision of the future. One of the most interesting questions about Jews is how is it possible that every 70 years they have a Holocaust? Every few decades they are kicked out from another city or another country, and they never learn from it. Are they stupid? They're definitely not stupid.
Not stupid.
They're not stupid at all.
But do they ask why?
And
Why
one
not?
and this is where I think that the rabbi didn't tell you the entire truth. Holocaust. I don't want to get into the debate what really happened in the Holocaust, gas chamber, no gas chambers. It's a very interesting topic. Holocaust, we agree that a lot of people suffer, a lot of Jews suffered during the Holocaust, let's say between 39 to 45, and quite a few Jews died, amongst many other people. But within the Jewish perspectives, the Holocaust is a unique event, and still they don't draw the necessary lesson. And why? Because Jews, as a people, as a tribe, have managed to get a lot out of the Holocaust. There wouldn't be Israel without the Holocaust. And it was a lot of money, the reparation money. And there wouldn't be Holocaust museums dedicated to the suffering of the Jewish to Jewish people as the ultimate form of suffering in New York and in Washington and in London, here in London, the beautiful Empire War Museum, one of the most beautiful museums in the world, is now a banal Holocaust museum that doesn't even tell the most crucial fact for Brits, that Britain didn't allow Jews to come to immigrate or to find refuge here along the war. So it's a Holocaust museum that's specializing in concealment of the truth. So it occurred to me that for Jews to endure collective suffering is not a big problem as long as the tribe prevail and comes up stronger. This is why the Jews are so obsessed with their Holocaust, and they are not even afraid, and I believe that this is the case, they're not even that afraid or worried about the idea that as we speak now, some of their oligarchs working out to bring a new disaster on the Jews. And it is very, very frightening. And I tell you why it is very frightening. First, it is very frightening for Jews. Should be very frightening. It is very dangerous. But the bigger problem is that when Jews suffer, a lot of other people suffer. They can be Iraqis and Syrians and Greece that was squashed by Goldman Sachs. And Europe and Britain and America is struggling, when we can see how the situation is becoming more and more volatile, a lot because of all of those Zion wars. And it's very, very dangerous.
And more volatile, centered around a certain part of real estate that's at the far end of the Mediterranean, between two rivers. Mm-hmm. It's becoming ever more strategic. It's becoming ever more crucial.
The issue is that it can obviously, and it will backfire on Israel, because they are not the only people. They have a very successful and devious oligarchy, but they are not the only people in the world. And as they could see already, when their lobbies pushed hard for America and Britain to attack Syria, to destroy the Assad regime, it didn't work out.
Do you see the influence of the Jewish lobby in decline already?
I think that something else is happening. If in 2002 or 2003 or 5 I spoke about immense Jewish power and people were kind of running away because they were afraid to deal with it, I'm now talking openly about Jewish power. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Everybody sees what is happening here in the Labour Party. We had a hero. We thought that he was a hero, Jeremy Corbyn. Within few days we realized that he's kind of bending over and subscribed to the most ludicrous cases of performance of Jewish power. Immediately, the Jewish oligarchs came with a list of demands. Everybody sees it. Nobody tried to hide it, and this is something that is very, very interesting about Jewish identity politics. They're bragging about it. They don't try to hide it. You mentioned the word conspiracy 40 minutes ago. There are no Jewish conspiracies. They never try to hide. All they engage in all those political games, the most horrid ones, in the open. One of the things, for instance, people talk about 9/11, September 11, yeah? And they say, oh, it's Israel. I don't say whether it is or not. I don't know enough about it. I'm obviously familiar enough with all the evidence. But what I always say, if it would be an Israeli, a week later, my mother would call me and say, oh, did you know this, the daughter of them, yeah, his cousin, he was flying the plane. That's the way it works. In Jewish culture, they say that Jewish women always complain that Jewish boys ejaculate very quickly because they are very quick to go to tell all the other lads. They're not very good in keeping secrets. They like to boast on their achievements.
Well, yeah, but that's often the way. That's often the reason given why things couldn't be conspiracies because the secret would come out. But some of the secrets that have come out a very long time after.
Like what?
Be it Gulf of Tonkin, which didn't happen. Be it USS Liberty in an Israeli context. That what happened there was clearly a false flag attack.
By the way, but I don't. It's not that I think that you are wrong, but the people who didn't bring the USS Liberty out were
Americans.
the Americans.
The Americans,
Were
yeah.
the Americans. I
Yeah.
don't say that Americans don't keep secrets. Americans keep secrets. you know, Americans keep secrets. But for Israelis, if Israelis, they didn't have any reason to talk about it. And it's very interesting, because um, the issue is still not a major issue in Israel, which is slightly embarrassing. Why? Because we don't see, that it has a significant impact. Israel doesn't feel embarrassed by it. USS Liberty is not the case. When we come to atomic bombs, in Israel we knew for many years that Israel has a nuclear reactor in Dimona. There were parody shows, and then we had Vanunu that
Yes.
revealed it to the West, but it wasn't a secret in Israel. Israelis were bragging about it.
Just to finish off, I read many years ago an excellent book written by an American diplomat who was stationed for more or less the whole of the mandate period in Jerusalem, and it was called One Palestine Undivided, and it followed in detail the British policy, the Jewish reaction, the Arab reaction, the increase in violence, the 36 uprising, the 37 Royal Commission, and all of this. And it followed it through with a very fair, neutral approach. and it showed that the Arab leadership were wretched. One of the messages that came out of this, the Arab leadership were wretched, and it seemed to be quite impressed with the Jewish leadership. As I've read more and more, particularly Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil, which followed the Jewish leadership's role in the events of 39 to 45, and the craven approach that the Jewish leadership had during that time, where it's not a huge exaggeration to say that the average Jews that was subject to Nazi brutality often largely behaved with great dignity, and the Jewish leadership behaved with the very reverse. It behaved with cowardness, and it was bought and sold just to be able to be number one Jew. It was a very woeful story.
Yeah.
What do you see in the current Jewish leadership? Do you see what the American diplomat saw, which was a leadership much more organised, a people much more organised and capable than the surrounding Arabs, and benefiting politically as a result? Or do you see this counterproductive, craven cowardness that's going to bring catastrophe upon the Jewish people? What do you think of how Israel in particular and the Jewish world more generally is actually led?
This is a crucial topic, and actually, it's the last chapter of my next book, The Wandering 2. And I argue that Jews were always very successful in erecting a very unique and functional cognitive elite that would be largely very interest in itself. It is hard to determine whether the contemporary Jewish elite, for instance, in Israel, is good for the Jews. I cannot tell you. I'm not so sure at all. We can look at Israel, and you will find out that the gap between rich and poor is amongst the biggest in the West, in developed countries, and yet the Israelis are amongst the happiest people in the world, which is very, very interesting statistics. As we know, Jewish elite didn't suffer in the Holocaust. How many Rothschild died? In fact, no one. They were very quick to escape. I have good reason to believe that when Israel faced its last days, those cognitive elite will find their way out. However, you don't need Gilad Atzmon to tell you that if Benjamin Netanyahu is talking to the American Congress, despite the American president will, it means that we are dealing with a hugely significant power, a power that is not encountered by pretty much anyone on this planet yet. We are dealing with a very effective society of oligarchs. Whether it is good to the Jews or not, I actually think that on the long run, it isn't, but as we already discussed, long run is not something that they are capable of really understanding deeply enough to save themselves.
Gilad Atzmon, it's been a real pleasure talking to you
For me as
today.
well.
I hope we can do this again some other time in the not too distant future, as I have many, many more
Inshallah.
questions.
Yeah. Thank
And
you so much.
thank you very much.
Thank you.